listen, I appreciate you taking a couple minutes here to talk to us about recruitment and kind of key talent acquisition in 2019. Certainly, we've seen that it's been a struggle for many employers in 2018, and it looks like that trend is going to continue well into 2019. So we'll be talking about kind of ways to address that and maybe remedy some of that in our upcoming employee lifecycle webinar series. But wanted to get your perspective today on some of the practical, legal, and regulatory considerations when clients are looking to identify and hire candidates. So if we start at the beginning, anything that employers should know or should be looking for related to job postings and sourcing of candidates?
Sure. So generally speaking, job postings should be neutral, and there shouldn't be, of course, any reference to a particular protected class. I think most employers would know that. I would hope they would at this point, but you never know. But every once in a while, we do see job postings that are inappropriate for some reason. For example, an employer might say, looking for younger people, or sometimes they don't say the word younger, but they say it in code.
Sure.
Looking for recent college graduates, which could be considered to be age discriminatory. At times, employers will try to put, or might be inclined to put, requirements in a job posting, such as no one with a criminal background, as an example, which might seem very logical to put in a job posting, but might actually be contrary to state law. In Pennsylvania, for example, there's a particular statute that an applicant cannot be rejected because of their criminal background unless it's related to the particular job that person is being hired to do.
Okay.
So if there's a job posting that says or implies we don't hire anyone with any criminal background, the employer would be in violation of that. We also, of course, encourage employers to seek job applicants from diverse sources. There are some sources that are better than others in terms of the percentage of male-female applicants, the percentage of otherwise diverse applicants, so-called minority or protected class groups, and the more diverse you can be, the better, especially if you are in an industry where you may have to answer to the government, if you have a government contract, or if you have to draft an affirmative action plan, that sort of thing. So.
Okay. How about, once we've gotten past that, we've got a couple resumes that have come in. Once candidates have been identified for interviews, anything that hiring managers kind of at a high level should be aware of?
Well, I think once people are identified for interviews, again, there's sometimes a screening process that happens with companies, and you have to make sure that the screening process is non-discriminatory as well. So you wouldn't necessarily pre-screen for people based on protected characteristics.
Sure.
We have had situations in the past where we've seen employers look at the name of an applicant, for example, and think, okay, well, the name looks like a foreign name, and
Sure.
kind of throw out the resume and automatically. So certainly we wouldn't want that. The applications nowadays have to be very consistent with the ban-the-box rules. We tell clients all the time, you can't ask about criminal background in the first application. And then obviously gender, male, female, there should be a healthy mix. And essentially it's what I would hope would be common sense to pick applicants and interview applicants based on their background and experience, not anything else.
Sure. Qualifications for the role, right?
Qualifications for the role, exactly.
Okay. Kind of a broad question, could go in a number of different directions, but one of the things that in our outsourced relationships that we're often responsible for related to recruitment is pre-hire checks, right? So whether that's a background check, a drug screen, pre-employment physical, behavioral, cognitive assessments, especially with kind of medical marijuana now, the drug screens, background checks. Talk to us a little bit about, kind of common sense guidance with those types of screens.
Right. So you're right, Matt. This is a topic that is fairly extensive. In fact, we've given seminars here at the firm just on the topic of background checks and all of the various considerations for background checks. So I think the first thing, just as a general umbrella thought here, as a policy, most of the things that you mentioned, employers would give a conditional offer to an applicant. In other words, they would interview an applicant and they would say to the applicant, we would like to hire you conditional upon,
Sure.
and then whatever the next test they would say. So they would say conditional upon a satisfactory criminal background check, or passing the drug test, or passing a credit check, or if it's a behavioral screen or something like that. There are many considerations along those lines. There is that statute I mentioned in many of the states for criminal background. There are ADA concerns, American with Disabilities Act concerns when it comes to drug testing. One of the items that many employers don't realize, and if they do realize they struggle with complying with, is the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is a strange place to have some employment regulations, but employers don't realize that they have to give very particular notice under the Fair Credit Reporting Act if they are going to run a consumer report. And a criminal background would be a consumer report, as would an educational background, checking on someone's education, which, by the way, I would recommend they do. It wouldn't be the first time that some of our clients find out that someone actually attended a college but did not get a degree.
Sure.
Or sometimes they didn't even attend. But a consumer report would be that. It would be a credit report, and again, there are very particular notices that they have to give at very particular times under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So generally speaking, those tests are allowed, but you just have to be a little careful. You mentioned medical marijuana. Very difficult topic these days. And the employer has to really make a decision. What do they want to do if someone comes back with a positive test for the active ingredients in marijuana? Some of our employers will refuse to hire someone if they fail any kind of drug test.
Sure.
Some will just take it case by case. And then frankly, some of our employers don't test at all. They just decide they will deal with it if someone's impaired and they really don't need to know, from the beginning stages.
Okay.
So,
how about applicability to the particular role? So, oftentimes when we step into a client and we look at what they've historically been doing, we'll see things like credit check, MVR check for a role that has no financial responsibility
sure.
and sits at a desk all day.
Right.
So talk, briefly again about that when it comes to background checks.
Right. Certainly the advice is, customize your plan, your hiring plan to, like you said, the role that they're doing. There really is no reason most of the time to run 5 or 6 different tests on someone if it just won't matter. So just to pick an easy example, if we have a manufacturing client, I don't know that it's necessary to run a credit check on someone who's going to be working in more of a kind of a blue collar job,
sure.
as an example. However, in that particular job, the drug test would probably be much more important than it would be for someone maybe in an office setting.
Sure.
So we do tell people, no reason to run the test. At times, employers will want to anyway. They say, well, what's the downside? Maybe no downside, but on the other hand, it depends on their policy.
Yep.
If their policy is that if someone has a weak credit score and they don't want to hire that person, they might be rejecting an applicant for no good reason because, again, it doesn't really matter.
Sure.
So you really have to look at your needs and figure out the time it takes to run all those tests and then go from there.
When I started my career, my HR career was in banking, and at that point we were required to do an affirmative action plan, so that kind of fell to my desk. Still have clients today that are required to do an affirmative action plan, not too many, but for those that may be subject to an AAP, what should they be looking out for as it relates to candidate posting, candidate sourcing?
Right. Well, the first thing I would say is that employers have to know whether they have to fill out an affirmative action plan AAP to begin with.
Sure.
And that's often confusing. We've had clients both ways. We've had some clients who complete an annual AAP and don't need to, and we certainly had our fair share of clients who have no clue that they really need to do it. So the first is that if there's an employer that has government contracts, and we don't have time to get into all the requirements, but certainly if they have federal government contracts, they should at least be asking the question of someone whether they have to have an affirmative action plan. And if they are required to do that, then they need to be very careful about keeping records of who applies for their jobs and who they interview for the jobs, and of course who they end up hiring for the jobs.
Sure.
And that also goes back to what are the sources of applicants, where are they getting those applicants? Because the federal government has a whole office dedicated to making sure that affirmative action plans are completed, that they're accurate, and of course the real objective is to make sure that the hiring process, the search process and the hiring process is being done equally for everyone.
And then finally, Mike, we've heard a lot recently about kind of equal pay legislation, right? So there's certain states that have effectively banned employers from asking candidates about their current or previous compensation. So talk to us a little bit about kind of your perspective on, is that legislation going to continue to expand out to multiple states? What is your guidance on maybe Pennsylvania, New Jersey, states that haven't necessarily enacted it yet, but it may be forthcoming?
Right. So the actual statutes that you're talking about, Matt, are restrictions on the employer asking questions during the interview process about what someone earned at their previous job.
Yep.
It's very common, and still is very common, to have an interview and say, so what were you making at your previous job? The thought is, and there's some statistics to back this up, that if there is gender discrimination and there's gender disparity, in other words, women are making less than men, that if you ask a woman what she made and it was lower than a man, then the company that she's being hired for might pay her more to bring her into the job, but it's still going to be less than what men were making.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are states that have restricted employers from asking that question, and there are lots of little ins and outs of what the statutes say. If someone volunteers, okay, but you can't ask. To answer your question about the expansion of that legislation, currently it appears that it will continue to expand. There are many, many states where that is being proposed. Pennsylvania does not have that currently. New Jersey does not have that currently. But there are proposals all the time in the legislature to add it, and at some point it might simply pass. Mm-hmm. So our advice to clients is that even though it may not be restricted, don't ask the question. Not that you will be violating the law necessarily in certain jurisdictions, but that's the trend. Mm-hmm. And also for employers that have employees in various jurisdictions, yep, they don't have to keep track of, well, I can ask it here, I can ask, but I can't ask it there. And it's just easier to keep track of.
Yep, yeah, and we've seen that with the ban the box, right? So
Absolutely.
Rather than having 4 or 5 different applications, better just to strip it off of all of them. And
have one application and then you're compliant everywhere. So
exactly.
Right, so Pennsylvania doesn't have ban the box, but many jurisdictions do. Philadelphia as an example. So.
Yep, perfect. Well, Michael, as always, I appreciate your time and your perspective on these topics. Again, going to continue to be applicable and kind of top of mind for employers as we go through 2019. And we'll be covering a lot more of these types of conversations in the months to come, and hopefully we'll hear from you then.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.